Hi, welcome to the Korean Help podcast. Korean Help is a set of initiatives helping the Korean American community in New York City. You can learn more about us at koreanhelp.org. I'm Yunho. I'm the program coordinator for Korean Help. Today, I thought we can address the ongoing issue of anti-Asian hate crimes, especially in New York City. So there's been a lot of new attacks, and over the past weekend, police are investigating 5 new attacks in the city. So what do you guys think is the main cause of all this hate against Asians?
I think the biggest reason probably is the pandemic and just all that frustration, right? People have relatives that died, friends that died. They're like financially impacted. They're physically, stuck in their homes. And, because elected officials, kind of pin that blame, like you guys were saying earlier, like scapegoating Asian Americans, maybe we became that outlet of anger, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's easy for hateful people to kind of blame everything on one source. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and just to point fingers for their personal hardships, I guess kind of relieve some of the stress off of themselves, since you're blaming someone else for everything that's going on.
And I read this article, directly linking the physical activity, the real world activity, to online hateful speech. And it was a New York Times article, and it showed that every time, like a member of Congress would post something negative about Asian Americans, these online chat rooms or whatever, the discussions would spike, and then the hateful hashtags. Like one of the tamer ones is like "Go back to China," and there are much more serious ones, right? And so that would the discussions would build, and then according to the article at least, that spilled over into the real world, and then we have all these physical attacks now.
Yeah, I think it also like you said, it has to do with like how Asians some people are not really looked upon as like Americans despite like being born here and living here. So I think that also plays a role, and as well as like being looked down upon as like weak, especially with all these attacks to the elderly and like women.
Yeah, good points.
Yeah. I think there's the stereotype that Asian Americans are very frail, and weak. So do you guys think that's mainly like that whole stereotype is kind of what makes Asian Americans an easy target?
I think yes, since we are minorities, and even out of the minorities, Asian Americans, I feel like are the least outspoken. Um, when we do have problems or issues, we speak out less and we have less of a voice, I think, whether it's because of the lack of representation in higher positions or just how we're raised, not to really show off our problems or trying to fix our problems within ourselves instead of sharing them with others.
Yeah, I mean, on that TV show, The Wire, it's been a while since I've seen that scene, but so I might be, off a little bit. But there's a gangster teaching like a newer gangster, saying, "Oh, it's how you carry it. It's how you carry your body language, right?" And so you can tell like the quote unquote soldiers from the more, other types of people, right? And so Asian Americans were taught to be, respectful, don't make waves, and our body language is like definitely fewer of us have aggressive body language, I think. And I mean, a lot of us don't even have assertive body language, right? We're just like more like humble body language. Um, And I think, so one thing that we emphasize here, right, at, Korean Help is, whether it's like a college interview or an internship or job interview, right, to get in the habit of expressing ourselves more, just sharing our thoughts more freely, and kind of just letting it out more, right? Not that we should be fake or anything, but just get more in the habit, right?
Yeah, like it's crazy because as Asians, like we're so used to kind of like behaving that way. My sister, she has a friend who's Chinese, but she was adopted by like British people, and like they're like British Americans, and like you can tell like it's just different, like because she
Yeah.
wasn't raised like as an Asian person, I guess, like with Asian culture. She's just
Mhm.
like way more like audacious, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like she just like does what she wants.
Oh my
Like the
goodness,
world is like her oyster. Like
yeah. I recently discovered Ali Wong. Do you guys know the comedian Ali Wong?
yeah.
Holy cow. So she's a revelation. And then I read that, her kind of role model is a comedian. Do you guys know who it is? I read that it's Eddie Murphy. So she's
Hmm.
basically doing her version of Eddie Murphy when she does stand-up comedy. And so it's like very just, sok 시원해, right? In Korean, that means
Hmm.
just a breath of fresh air, sort of like, right? And it's just strong and free and uninhibited, right? Not that I agree with everything she says, right? But it does feel good, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. So like going back to the attacks, why do you guys think so many of them are against senior citizens?
yeah, that's a tough question to answer. But I'll throw in a quick example, right? So this Korean American on Wall Street, just a little bit of history. He's like in his early 50s. He says when he first joined Wall Street, back in the day, there was like less than five maybe Asian Americans on Wall Street. So he's one of the guys who paved the way, right? But so he's seen a lot of the world, a lot of New York City, and he says that whether so for Black people and Jewish American people, white people won't like insult them or say derogatory things in front of them. They might behind their backs, but never in front of them because they know there'll be consequences. But Asian Americans, they'll just do it so he's observed them do it so freely, right in front of us, right? And so then that goes back to the earlier thing we're talking about, and I think senior citizens also, they just their body language is more like slower, weaker, meeker, and it's just I don't know, it's just so upsetting, right? You guys were talking about how upsetting it was, but it just I feel like there's such a lack of respect for Asians as human beings right now, and that a person could just see a senior citizen, a poor, meek senior citizen, and just punch them in the face.
And I think a big part of it is knowing that they won't really be able to do anything about it, and really how weak they are and how like little power they have. They know that they won't really need to face any consequences. It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think like some of the violence is also caused by like the myth, like the model minority myth that like Asians are doing so well. I think that's also a part of it, and like also like including like the financial stress and burden that everyone's experiencing, and the need to like blame everything on one group of people.
Yeah.
I think that myth just makes everything worse also.
Yeah. I would guess so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so other than waiting for this pandemic to end, do you guys think there's any way to change the minds of hateful people?
So I think we sort of like within our little group here sort of identified that we think that we've been scapegoated, right? And so elected officials like the former president sort of, funneled all of this anger and frustration our way. And so maybe it's not easy to undo that, right? But I do think, so, Korean Help, we work with closely with the community. We work with, many other communities. And I think long term, if if I know somebody, right, I think, I'll be less likely to punch them in the face. So I think, continuing to build the relationships is very, very important because, we are very like, as one like Rabbi Bob Kaplan, he says, we're siloed off in our different communities and we don't interact much. So I think, that's something that we can really do, right? To really continue to build. And I think, you in the younger generation, you guys will be really instrumental in that because older people just, language, culture wise, right? It's just so hard for them to mix with others.
Yeah, and I think for us within our own personal lives, we should be able to stand up to the little comments or the remarks that we get on the daily and understand that we also have to play a part in teaching how hurtful that those remarks can be and um, teach everyone that these these are so normalized and it really shouldn't be, and that the way people speak and their language really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I think that like changing the minds, like trying to change others is that's one way, but another way is to like stand strong together and make sure that like we have a strong foundation so that like
Mhm.
if we like show that like we're very united and that we're like you know like as one, and like
Yeah.
they'll be able to like see us in a different light
Very
down
good
the road.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Going back to that guy on Wall Street, so he would say, right, if you're on the playground, your goal should be to look so tough that nobody will pick a fight with you. But then I would say, that sounds good, but wouldn't it be better to have 9 other friends standing right next to you? Wouldn't that be even more effective, right? But
Yeah.
so good point, Harold.
Yeah, so I guess with like a lot of movements recently, the media attention and these rallies are probably temporary. So what do you guys think is something we can do to reduce hate in the long term?
I actually think that, like efforts like this podcast are like so important because like we keep talking about similar like themes, right? Like lack of assertiveness, being seen as too meek, whatever, having not having a large enough voice, right? So I
Mhm.
think like this podcast creates a real space where, especially the younger generation, you guys can just talk about these issues, right, and then be heard. And I think we need many more spaces like this, right?
Yeah, and I think like, representation is even more important of Asians in like movies and shows, but in a way that portrays them as, just like regular Americans, people. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And also, I know social media is a huge factor for a lot of my friends, and I know a bunch of people have been posting like on their stories um, about anti-Asian hate and crimes. But I think understanding that it just doesn't end with a single post, and just because you post something about it doesn't mean that you're free and like the problem is fixed, but actually doing something about it and being able to keep the word out, sharing it to others, and go like acting based on your values.
And I also think like um I mean this may sound a little extreme, but like I think like there should be like harsher punishments for this type of stuff because I feel like people are getting let off so like easily based on like what I've read and seen. Like like for example, like just saying that you're having a bad day, like for that to even come up as an excuse and even like work. Yeah, I think it should be like harder like cracking down on this stuff.
Yeah, that's actually good segue into Michelle's topic.
Yeah, so on Tuesday, March 16th, just about a week ago, a 21-year-old white male killed 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian American women at 3 different spas or massage parlors in Atlanta, Georgia. And according to the police, he was motivated by sexual addiction that was against his religious beliefs. And the next day, the Cherokee County Sheriff's spokesman said, quote, "Yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did." So really sympathizing for what he did. And people have even found that through Facebook, he promoted T-shirts describing COVID as an imported virus from China and making jokes out of it. There have been arguments that the mainstream media failed to cover the shooting and the victims who were affected. And they said that it really emphasized that it wasn't motivated, but due to his sexual addiction, and that the shooter is a churchgoer, which is beside the point. But there's been overall a huge doubt on the racist intent, despite the fact that the businesses were all Asian owned and 6 out of the 8 victims were of Asian descent. So seeing these facts, how do you guys feel about the shoot not being categorized as an Asian hate crime, but instead being sexually motivated?
Like, I don't buy that, obviously. Like, and I think it's even worse. Like, this is like a sick man. Because I think it was like a disgusting mix of, like sex addiction and misogyny and hatred of women, also mixed in with hatred of Asian people. So I think that's like just like even worse. Yeah, and obviously it was not just based on his sex addiction, because if it really was, he could have easily attacked like the numerous adult shops in the area, but instead he did decide to drive like 30 something miles down to these locations, which were specifically Asian owned. So yeah, I think it's just like, I don't understand how like he can get any sympathy, especially like from the sheriff. I thought that was like really weird. Yeah, but then like, yeah, we should also like, the media should also really focus on the victims and like their families. I feel like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think you make some really good points. I mean, it has been recent, right? So, the investigation is probably ongoing and we don't know all the facts. But I think it sounds like just, kind of like from what we can gather so far, it does sound like this jumble of a bunch of things, but all of them negative, right? But and including at the very least, some measure of hate towards Asians from the T-shirts and stuff.
Yeah, and there have been comparisons of how media is currently covering it versus more local and Asian American owned outlets. And most of the Asian American ones hone in on really making sure how like who the victims are. For example, like the Korean Daily learned the victims' ages and talk more to the people in the nearby stores to learn more about them. And also the Korea Times Atlanta cited a witness's account that the shooter did yell, "I'll kill all the Asians" before the attack. And this hasn't really been covered in like the news outlets that we regularly read. So what do you guys like? Do you think that there's a right way to cover this event, or is it all just based on kind of what each type of media has like in on hand and like the information they have?
Yeah, I
I
think.
think.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
You
sorry. You
No,
could
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I think as a lawyer, I feel like all media outlets have a responsibility to share the relevant facts and not pick and choose, right? And then because like people are jumping to conclusions anyways, right? This conclusion, that conclusion, and but how are we to tell unless we get all the facts and the right facts, right?
Yeah. I don't know, like just based on like the history of shootings, I feel like it's just like important to focus more on like the victims and like their families, um, and not on the shooter, because I've heard like it can actually like motivate other people to do the same stuff, because they kind of like see it as like a good thing to like be like all publicized and stuff.
That would be a nightmare.
Um, yeah, apparently it's like a thing. It's like a whole thing. So I think like considering how many mass shootings this country has, like media should definitely be more careful, and it should like almost be like a rule or something. Um, just like be really careful reporting this kind of stuff. And yeah, I think it's important to like make like humanize Asian people, especially right now. Also, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. Like for me, like I only were like able to find out about the names and the people that were of the victims, and like on the like media, I wasn't able to really get that type of information. And when it did come out, it was very slow pace. I think
Mm,
is right when she says that they need to focus on like the victims, especially when there's like one of them there was like two kids relying on one of the victims as like as a motherly figure and also as like a
yeah,
supporter. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
So just before going on to Harold, I'd like to say the names of the victim. Um, so Zhao Tan is a 40-year-old immigrant from China and went on to own two spas in Georgia. Helena Ashley Yuan Gonzalez, a 33-year-old newly married mother of two. Young A.U., a 60-year-old Korean American. Hyung Jung Grant, 51-year-old single mother of two sons. Paul Andre Michaels, 51-year-old who served in the Army before moving to Atlanta. Soon Jung Park, 74-year-old Korean American. Sung Ja Kim, 69-year-old immigrant from Korea. And Dayu Feng, 44-year-old who recently started working at the Young Asian Massage.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay. Next we're gonna talk about how it's being addressed politically. So recently, 2 days after the shooting that we just talked about, President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris met with AAPI leaders in Atlanta, Georgia. And originally the meeting was meant for celebrating the 1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, but they shifted their focus to the anti-Asian violence topic. And briefly, basically, it just came down to like a lot of saying about how there's racism ingrained in America for a long time, and that Biden was saying how language from like people of power is very powerful, especially from former President Donald Trump, who are saying like phrases like the China virus and the Kung flu. And Kamala basically said something along the same lines. So he said words have consequences, and that he also did end up talking about the $300 million for safety and relief programs and for anti-Asian hate. So
Yeah.
I want to ask, what are your thoughts on his comments? And yeah.
You guys were saying earlier that you didn't quite feel a strong impact, right?
Yeah, I don't think really it's enough, and not really comforting the Asian American community. I don't think they're doing the most that they could do personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have been better to offer like words of comfort, especially to the victims' families and stuff. I don't know if that's like what people do usually, but yeah.
Yeah, the leaders, the AAPI leaders asked for $300 million for safety and relief programs, but there wasn't really much talk about like any action other than like just saying that, like kind of blaming the language people of power use. I feel like he could have said a lot more things to uplift and give like hope to Asian people, especially as president of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, we don't disagree with what he said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We agree with it. We appreciate it. We just sort of feel intuitively that there might have been more. Is that what you guys are saying?
Yeah, because it was just like such a horrible incident. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
Like just the magnitude of the crime, I guess.
Yeah. So, should we actually start to wrap up, you know?
Oh yeah, is that it for the questions?
Yeah, for today, that
Oh,
sounds
okay.
good. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you to everyone who listened this far to our podcast. Please check out koreanhelp.org. Thank you.